Welcome to Untapped, Knowledge for College, presented by the College Knowledge Foundation. Join us as we untap the world of college admissions, financial aid, and student life through collective wisdom and engaging conversations.
So welcome back to another episode of Untapped Knowledge for College. I'm your host, Donovan Lindsay, founder of College Knowledge Foundation, and I'm so excited today to talk a little bit about one of the most important topics when you look at college, financial aid. I'm joined by someone who I've had the pleasure of knowing for many years now, someone who actually had a big influence when I was starting out in admissions in my career, Nick Tomaskovic. Nick has worked in many areas in admissions, and early on in my career, I was able to learn from him on the road recruiting together. He also now has much experience when it comes to financial aid. So firsthand, we're going to get some firsthand knowledge from someone like him, and this information can definitely just be a huge game changer for students and their families. Today, we're going to break down some of the basics, but also dive into some of the common misconceptions that people will often hear, but also how can students and their families make the most out of some of the financial resources that they may know that's available to them and some that they may not know about. So whether you are just starting out or whether you're deep into the process of looking for colleges, today we're definitely going to be able to offer some valuable insights. So let's get started. But Nick, I can't express how appreciative I am for you joining us today, but how are you?
Donovan, hey, welcome. I am doing fantastic. It's good to be here. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to be on College Knowledge and hopefully share a little bit of what I know to some of your viewers and or listeners. I'm hopeful that it helps, if not provide some answers to everything, at least start to get people thinking about what they should be asking and just gain an overall awareness to some of the important things in the financial aid field.
Yes, and I can't express how excited I am for this episode because everyone that I've ever had on here, I've learned something from. So I'm definitely excited to learn a little bit more from you today. So let's dive right in. So for anyone just kind of logging on and listening, what would you say who's heard the words financial aid before? What would you say financial aid actually is?
Yeah, that's just good place to start as any, right? Kind of baseline financial aid. What is it? Who gets it? Um, what does it look like? What does it mean for me? All of these sorts of
Mm-hmm.
questions and conversation starters. Financial aid, in short, is it's a form of assistance that students will use to and families to help make an education affordable. I look at financial aid in terms of resources and tools. What can we use in terms of these resources and tools to help us achieve our goals? So that looks a little bit different for everybody. There are some important components, I think, um, to making that possible. We're going to talk a little bit about the FAFSA. I know we're going to talk a little bit about different forms of financial aid.
Yeah.
Financial aid is not going to mean the same thing for everyone too. Excuse me. And I think that that's an important distinction to make because just as the things that make us different and unique, so too does financial aid in that sense. So there are different schools out there. Schools utilize different forms of financial aid. So again, I just want to preface that, and I know your viewers and listeners understand too that this is not a one size fits all approach because financial aid is multifaceted and it's anything but that.
Definitely. One thing I started to do once I started college knowledge is I will try to explain, because different depending on where you are, things are called different things. So one of
Mhm.
the things that I know, also financial aid may be called a student aid, like some people may have heard that term referred to, but pretty much the same type of thing, like just aid that you're getting to help you as a student, but it's all financially, it's pretty much the same thing. We look at student aid or financial aid, but I know different places they will at times potentially call it different things.
Yeah, no, 100%. And various schools that I've worked with or worked for have had financial aid offices that are devoted just purely to financial aid without speaking or being connected to other offices. Other
Mhm.
offices or other student aid offices operate under the umbrella of an enrollment management office or department. So there are different ways, and it's interesting to see, for me, having worked at 3 different schools, the relationship that oftentimes exists in similar ways and different ways at various institutions. So, but
Sure.
you're
Yeah.
absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah. I always say I did a bunch of different sessions this past summer, and questions from, you just never know what a student's going to ask. And unfortunately, at times I feel like I'm not answering their question, but I'm like, here's based off of my knowledge, here's what I know. But 4,000 or so universities and colleges throughout the United States, it's like you could call each one and they can have a different answer as to how they operate and what their deadlines are and those types of things. So,
Yeah.
there's never just a one size, never just a one size fit all for really anything. So it's definitely
Yeah.
good to kind of dot your I's and cross your T's, regardless of where you're looking at going.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, Donovan, that sentiment of not a one size fits all approach really holds true for higher education in general, and a lot of that comes down to, oftentimes we'll counsel for fit, and there are different institutions types out there. There's public schools, there are private institutions, there's undergraduate undergraduate education, there's graduate education. So,
Sure. Yeah.
and the spectrum, it's really not, nothing's hard and fast. It's a real spectrum, and different students are looking for different things. And financial aid impacts the student who is attending a 4-year private institution in similar but also very drastically different ways at the student who is attending a 2-year community-based institution, or one who's looking for a terminal degree. And so, I think the only thing that is consistent in these scenarios is the student and their individual needs. Students are going to have different needs, but yeah, a lot remains to be determined, between their very, very variable.
Yeah. So when you look at financial aid, what are the different types of financial aid?
Yeah. So broadly speaking, financial aid, student aid will fall into 4 main categories. So when I think of financial aid, I think of assistance primarily in the forms of buckets. So there's a bucket for scholarships, there's a bucket for grants, there's a bucket for loans, and there's a bucket for something called work study, or FWS, federal work study, because it's a federally derived program that students need to be eligible for based on their financial threshold. And that's derived from the FAFSA, right? And then, like anything, and the further you get into to any of those categories, the further down the rabbit hole you get. And then there's some variation between the types of scholarships, scholarships that are offered by the schools, generally speaking. That's pretty common, scholarships, and everybody loves scholarships. Scholarships are the form of gift aid. It's a wonderful word that students love to see on their financial aid summaries because it's money that they don't have to be paying back, right? So the scholarships, I always say, are wonderful. They're a great gift to the students. There are different types of scholarships too. There are scholarships that are purely based on merit. There are, or academic performance. There are others that are going to be based on need, financial need. And then there's kind of a hybrid category that a lot of colleges and universities will look into awarding, and that kind of is a little bit of both. So there's a need component, there's an academic component. Some scholarships are the criteria is going to be based on a donor, maybe, perhaps. So a student who's from a particular school might be eligible for a scholarship, while another who attends, another who went to another school in high school, or is looking for a specific major, or who has a specific, let's say, criteria that they meet, parent in the armed services, or they meet a certain other criteria, things like that. So scholarships are that form of aid, which can be renewable. They could be one and done, so to speak. But generally speaking, they're the most preferential in forms of the as far as financial aid goes. Then there's always that grants category. Grants are going to be very similar to scholarships in the sense that grants don't need to be repaid. You know, that the institution, either the college, the university, or a state or government agency, is going to be quite literally granting you the money to study. And so grants are oftentimes tied to, as I mentioned, state or federal aid. When I think of the schools that I've worked for, have all been in the state of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Okay, so the FIA is going to basically be the Pennsylvania Higher Education Assistance Agency. That's going to be the primary form of student-assisted grants that we'll see for a lot of our students who are eligible for state grants. And some other schools, other states have different forms of state grants as well. Some will be able to be taken to different schools outside of where the student is from, so different states. They'll cross state boundaries. Fee is going to be largely restricted to citizens of Pennsylvania, with very few exceptions there. That's something that you want to keep in mind too, is if you're applying to a scholarship or you feel like you're eligible for a grant, do a bit of homework and figure out if you can, is that good for just one location or does that travel well?
Okay. Yeah, lots of nuances for sure.
Lots of nuances for sure. Yeah. And then there's the category that everybody loves to hate, which is loans. Loans, I feel like, have a really bad connotation in higher education. Nobody likes a loan. Loan is going to need to be, paid back sooner or later. So it's sure. for that, it helps you reach a goal by borrowing a loan. The essence of a loan is that it needs to be repaid. So when I always talk about loans, and I can go a little further into this now or later, but we talk about manageable debt and good debt versus bad debt. And student loans have gotten certainly some bad rap in recent years, but by and large, as long as they are used wisely and sparingly, they could be an immensely helpful tool to helping a student and a family bridge that financial gap.
For sure.
Right. And then the last category we talked about, or bucket, so to speak, would be federal work study. And that's really something that the federal government will earmark certain funds every single year. So it is variable. It's generally set based on the year. So what the funding level is for 1 year could vary, 5 years from now or 10 years from now, just as it did 5 years or 10 years ago. And generally speaking, students have to be eligible for work study. They'll see this on their financial aid package at schools prior to enrolling, and they'll figure out if this is something they want to pursue. Work study is an opportunity for students to engage in employment on campus and get some money back to help them further their studies as well. Not everybody's going to qualify for work study, and that's something I want everybody to be mindful of. There's different criteria, and that criteria does vary based on year to year, just as it varies school to school.
I'm glad you said it, but year to year it could change, because that was a follow-up question I was going to ask. Like, if you get it 1 year, are you guaranteed to kind of get it the next year? But with anything really, with scholarships and even grants at times, depending on its requirements, I find having left working for university, I get so many different types of questions now, and like so many students will ask about financial aid, and again, it's not one size fits all, but it could only be for 1 year where you get that scholarship or that grant. Like it's nothing. Sure. It's like nothing can be. It's so good to do that diligence in your homework, because nothing that you get your first year could continue. Nothing that you get your first year is guaranteed to continue. Like year after year after year. Like it's very nuanced with what you may, and it could be different requirements as to how you keep it.
So much is tied to a federal aid rather than in purely institutional aid, which can also vary based on the budget or the shifting climate. So much of the federal aid is tied to those yearly changes, and what is appropriated to institutions of higher learning at the time. So it really represents a snapshot. Oftentimes I hear from families that I work with specifically, or I'll say especially for parents who are maybe a little older and they remember going to college, their experience in financing their education was oftentimes drastically different.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. You speak to a lot of families that are like, wow, college didn't cost this much when I went to school, and it was a very different climate. And I think it's easy to be dismissive, and I think it's easy to be kind of cliche about that, but it is true because we do live in a different world. And when you look at the rate that education has increased, or excuse me, the cost that tuitions have increased year over year, decade over decade, it really has outpaced a lot of our families' abilities to keep up with that, in terms of salaries, in terms of income, in terms of how they go about prioritizing paying for their child's education.
Sure.
So I think that's something to bear in mind too. And you mentioned something really interesting, Donovan, about how it could vary year to year, even depending at the school. There are so many factors that could affect your eligibility. And a lot of times students don't realize that they need to maintain oftentimes academic progress. There are standards, GPA levels, for instance, or rates of completion. So there's something out there that's called SAP. Okay, so
Okay.
SAP refers to satisfactory academic progress. So in a nutshell, what SAP essentially means is that students taking federal and state assistance, and oftentimes institutional aid, like scholarships as well, basically are signing a contract. They're receiving funds to help them meet their educational goals. And they're taking financial aid, but that does come with a condition. And that condition is that I need to make successful academic progress. I need to pass the credits that I'm attempting. I need to go to class. And I need to, generally speaking, do well. And so you look at the credits completed over the credits attempted model. And so really it's a percentage. And in order for students to successfully meet SAP year over year, they have to be passing 67% of the courses that they're attempting. And generally speaking, now I know that this is just for my Penn State lens here, but generally speaking, a 2.0 or higher is needed for SAP, right? So and oftentimes scholarships are going to be that are merit-based are going to be higher than that. So that's something that I think you want to consider as well. Half-time versus full-time. Am I taking 12 plus credits a semester? Am I taking 24 credits a year? Or do I have a special situation where maybe I'm not doing so hot this semester, and maybe I need to dial it back because I have a job, and it's not necessarily work study. And so I'm commuting to that job and I'm putting in hours before or after class and I'm helping my family, pay for my education. And that's become an increasingly prevalent trend that we've seen, a higher need population, that is on the front line of really assisting their families help pay for college. And that's another way that college has changed is I think just the overall need level, and awareness of that, which is a whole nother conversation. But full-time versus half-time could obviously impact the way that aid is dispersed. And students should always consult their financial aid office if they're thinking about adding or dropping a class, because, again, for all the reasons that we talked about, they have very real implications on the financial aid that they see or don't see.
Yeah, and I brought what I set up because I remember, I think I was going into my it wasn't like year from year, it was like semester to semester. So it was like going from like third to fourth semester. I remember it being over like the winter break, but I remember looking and seeing that I wasn't getting as much financial aid I was in the fall semester as I was going to get when I was going to the spring semester. And I was like, oh my gosh, like what happened? What did I do wrong? Did I not fill out a form? And I remember calling the financial aid office and I left a message because they had just gotten back. And as you know, you can just get back from a break, your phones are ringing off the hook. So I had just gotten back and I was like, before they called me back, I had looked at the requirements and I no longer had met the GPA requirement. And I didn't even realize at that time that I needed, I think it was like a 3.5 or something. I was like at a 3.3 from that one semester to the next. And I'm like, I didn't even know that. So that literally happened to me like that. I remember that happening. I'm like, okay, there's like, $1,500 from that scholarship that I'm now not getting. But luckily, that scholarship wasn't like a one and done. So I was able to actually get it back, fortunately, that next academic year, because my
Yeah.
GPA was high enough. But I know at times even that's not
Once
the
again,
case.
met the
Yeah,
requirements. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, no, and that's something that students want to keep in mind, especially our listeners out there who might have started at one institution and transferred to another, or
sure.
who, depending on what time this airs in the semester,
Hmm.
might currently be mid-semester or even waiting on their final grades and thinking about, returning to the same school or transferring to another one. SAP, much like student loan debt, will travel with you from institution to institution. So it's very rare that students will find themselves dealing with the clean slate scenario, as much as I personally wish that, because that would make everybody's lives a lot easier. It's one of those things that usually carries with you.
Hmm.
Students that find themselves in situations where they say, well, I didn't fail any classes, so I should be doing okay, right? This is my financial aid I'm eligible for, right, Nick? And I say, well, unfortunately, Donovan, you didn't fail them, but you withdrew from 3 of them, and
Yeah,
oftentimes that's enough to put people in the deficit there. So again, take home message: always check with your financial aid office, because they oftentimes can counsel you on what might be the best, or what will hopefully be the best fit for you on a personal level.
sure. No, great info. And yeah, all these things that we're talking about right now, I have all these memories flooding back to at times panicking because just not knowing things myself as a student, and just kind of some of the things that I had went through. So
Yeah.
lots of refreshers in my mind right now.
Conversely, that panic is not only what keeps me employed, but is also an amazing opportunity to turn that around and
Sure.
to see it go away. No, it's in all seriousness, it's a very rewarding, it's a stressful position,
Hmm.
because as you can imagine, finances, regardless of what context, higher education or not,
Hmm.
finances are always going to be uncomfortable, and it's always going to be a sensitive subject, at least to some degree. Um, but being able to be an advocate for students, being able to be someone who they view as a resource, and to build that trust, and to say,
Yes.
I can solve this problem, or at the very least, I can put you in touch with someone who can, or I can walk you through what this all means and help decipher um, what SAP means, and how do we get you back on track, or how do we renew this scholarship, or if you're going to withdraw or take a temporary leave of absence, do steps X, Y, and Z so that you're in a great position to hit the ground running when you return to the university or pursue your education at another institution. This is the thing that really make it rewarding. Um,
Sure.
Also being in an able position to advocate when students come to you, and this will vary based on institution. The discretionary funds that students have at their disposal, excuse me,
Yeah.
the discretionary funds that schools have at their
Yeah.
disposal. If students are really having a hard time, if they're going through some personal issues,
Hmm.
wellness, mental wellness, physical well-being, mom and dad just lost their job, or um, unfortunately, we're seeing an increase of the number of students that are emancipated and or homeless,
Hmm.
especially in this part of the country. It's
Hmm.
heartbreaking to see.
Yeah.
To be a financial aid professional who can maybe look at that and say, you don't have to withdraw. This doesn't have to be the end of the line for you. You came here for a reason. We want to see you fulfill that goal, right, of getting your degree. What resources do we have at our disposal? Are there emergency funds available? Are there payment plans available?
Yeah.
And that's something that a lot of schools will offer through the billing departments, which is generally referred to as the bursar, which is a fancy way of saying billing. It's somewhat of an antiquated term, but if I say bursar, most people kind of know what I'm talking about. It's
Hmm.
it's the university billing offices, and who can you talk to, and what can you tap into to um, to make a really bad situation maybe a little less scary.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you had mentioned, that I think is crucial, is having developed that trust, because at times the student they could just withdraw. They don't know that there are these other options.
Yeah.
One of the things that I liked about my role when I worked in college admissions, which is something that most don't have, is when they get to work with current students.
Yeah.
So often,
Yeah.
you in admissions, once they pay, you're kind of done with them, and you're focused on kind of recruiting that next class where they kind of move on to a different office. Whereas I was able to advise so many student organizations and get to know these students as students. And I realized myself, having worked in admissions, that there were kind of these discretionary fundings for current students. So
Yeah.
depending on your situation, you may not have qualified for something in the past, but there has been money set aside for your specific circumstance or your
Yeah.
specific situation. So I think that was extremely important to hit on, because having worked in higher education, that's not something I knew until I was like, well, let me make a call down to the financial aid office. And one of my friends was like, oh yeah, send her down, and we'll talk to her. We actually have discretionary funding, like you were saying, for
Yeah.
X, Y, and Z. So I was like, oh, that's good to know.
Yeah.
But I think that's crucial, because life happens. You're in college, just kind of navigate, but then
Boy, doesn't it? Yeah.
life sometimes.
Well, and so curveballs have and will continue to impact everybody. I think of and this kind of broadens the conversation to supporting resources on college that colleges or universities offer. And I know that at my current place of employment, Penn State, we have additional resources through our student affairs office or our student
Mhm.
engagement offices that students can take advantage of, that don't maybe initially come to mind when they think about student aid or financial aid. But there are resources out there such as food pantries. If
Yeah.
students, so a lot of colleges and universities are very mindful of food shortages and food insecurities, and so a lot of institutions, including my location, Penn State Scranton, we have a food pantry right over in our student building here on campus in the SLC. You go in, it's always stocked. There's no stigma, no judgment. It's always kept there with dry goods and food that students can take either for themselves or their families if they're going through
Mhm.
some financial hardships, and as staff and faculty as well. So that's something I want to, obviously touch upon. And also, a lot of colleges and universities will offer public transportation free.
Mhm.
Is through their student ID, bus pass, transportation that's going to be covered, that helps students get to and from class. So there are other resources, tools that fall under the auspices of aid that don't directly come to mind and don't directly relate to dollars and cents on your bill, but have a very real impact on our communities.
Yeah, I mean, all of that's great. That's some of the things I didn't even think of. But when you need some extra money, it's definitely good to know about all those extra resources that are out there. So when looking at financial aid, what would you say are some of the more common ways to actually apply to get financial
Yeah. So now we get to talk about the FAFSA.
aid?
We get to talk about the free application for federal student aid, which is, and we love our acronyms in higher education. We especially love our acronyms at Penn State, but FAFSA, or free application for federal student aid, is going to be the form that we always encourage students and families complete when applying to school, in tandem with applying to school, because they never know what they're going to qualify for. It's a form that's completed 100% online. It looks at students and contributors, and this is a new term. So there's a lot of changes going on with the FAFSA for this current year, that we're still in the midst of figuring out. So
Mhm.
financial aid has been somewhat of an evolving landscape of late. But the FAFSA has undergone some drastic changes. So that will look very different from when you were working with students
Mhm.
years back. FAFSA has been consolidated from about 135, 136 questions all the way down to about 30. So
Wow.
Yeah, major streamlining. And so a lot of that is going to be direct import with students and parents, which are now referred to as contributors, their financial information data retrieval tool. It's going to consolidate some of the other questions, look at income, look at some thresholds, look at savings, and some different thresholds that were put in place this year and going forward that were not in place previously. And so that has implications on the financial aid landscape, what students would qualify for this year. And the number of conversations that I've had with students and their families this year, well, we didn't get what we had last year, or
Yeah.
we actually got a lot more, or
Hmm.
I expected this question to be on there, or I expected it to be, to take half a day to work on the FAFSA. And in reality, it took us 20 minutes. So it's definitely something that is a crucial part. And a lot of schools use it to award financial aid. So there's, like I said before, there are those forms of scholarships and grants that are need derived. And where does that need get derived from? It's from the FAFSA. So a
Hmm.
lot of times we hear students and families suggest or say that, well, I know I'm not going to make, I know I make too much money. I'm not going to qualify for anything. Why even fill it
Yeah.
out? Which I guess I understand, if that is all you've heard and
Hmm.
if that's what your experience has been at a particular school. But again, going back to your point earlier, all schools are different. And
Hmm.
so, what you qualify for at one school, you may very well not, or qualify for even more at the next. Certain things are going to be universal. The amount that you can borrow in direct loans as a student, the fixed interest rate there, the borrowing capacity, your grant eligibility. Some things are really set in stone, but again, with being just how new the new FAFSA truly is, so many of those pieces of the puzzle, so to speak, are still being sorted out. I always recommend that families fill out the FAFSA, because you never know. You never know.
Likewise, and I was talking with a student this summer, and they were basically saying what you were saying. I was like, well, my older sibling, my parents went through the same thing with them. They didn't get anything. Does it
Yeah,
even make sense that I submit it? And I was like, you never know what's going to happen in life.
yeah,
So being able to have submitted that form and then at least just go back and then edit some things because someone
yeah,
lost a job or parents split up, or like there's so many reasons why that I would advocate for students to submit it, because I'm like, life's sometimes. So you
yeah.
just never know. So to be on the safe side,
100%.
it may take you 20 minutes and you may not get that 20 minutes back to fill it out, but in the long run, it could save you a lot of time and also, money.
So exactly, I have the perfect example. It's a student that and remain nameless, but you'll
Hmm.
get the gist. Um, didn't previously fill out the FAFSA. Okay. Went into it blind. I'm gonna pay off the balance for my tuition. I got this, Nick. No worries. Okay, that's all well and good. Well, we have a good bit of snow here in northeastern Pennsylvania
Yeah.
in the winter. We get about halfway through the spring semester, right? So February, March time, and student gets into a fender bender because of inclement
Uh,
weather, winds up needing to replace the car.
uh-huh.
Had they filled out the FAFSA, because the FAFSA is good for the year, right? So you don't have to. We recommend that students will start that on October 1st, but we could talk a little bit about how that's going to be extended this year, probably most likely to December. So by
Hmm.
the time we're listening, interviewers are listening to this right now, they can probably have a good idea of when that's going to be released and what those recommended filing dates are. Student wound up saying, okay, well, I'm going to fill out the FAFSA, and I'm going to be eligible now to take out my student loans. And, that $5,500 that they were able to borrow made all the difference in helping them
Yeah,
stay in the game.
that's huge.
It's again, it's the things that you don't see coming that it's always good to have that safety net.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. One of the things, actually, when I was in high school, someone from where you actually work now had come to my high school, Pocono Mountain West High School,
Okay.
and they had come for like a financial aid night,
Yeah.
and did this huge presentation, And I remember one of the slides that they had this in red, but they had make sure you go to, which I know the URL has changed, but it was like, make sure you go to the .gov website, because
Yes.
they're like, there
Yeah.
is a FAFSA.com website, and they ask
Yeah.
you for your information, but it doesn't go anywhere. So
Yeah.
I remember sitting in the back of the auditorium, looking to my left to my mom like a deer caught in the headlights. And she looked at me, she goes, did you go to the FAFSA.com? And I did. I did.
Already knew the answer.
I had went to
That was such a parent
FAFSA.com.
question. Yeah.
Yeah, I went
Yeah.
to FAFSA.com. So like that's something that I
Yeah.
try to emphasize to students. Like, make sure like when you're putting in like this type of information, you're at like a .org or .gov like website,
Yeah.
because there are people that do try to scam you out there. But I remember literally that moment so vividly when the
Yeah.
lady on stage mentioned that, and I was like, I was one of those people who, I
And
went to the wrong website. So
you
luckily she
remembered all
said that.
these years later. Yeah.
Yeah.
No. So two points to follow that up. Studentaid.gov. Okay.
Yes.
That's your entry point to applying for into the world of federal student aid, and that's where I direct everybody to as a great baseline. You'd be prompted to create, you and your contributor / parent, and contributors, by the way, Donovan, do not have to be parents per se.
Okay.
They could be a guardian, they could be somebody other than who is directly related to you,
Okay.
outside of your immediate family. For the FAFSA purposes, you will need to put either a family member or somebody who is going to be responsible, at least in that guardianship capacity.
And there you have it, episode 1 of Understanding Financial Aid with Nick Tomaskovic. Tune in. We're going to definitely continue this conversation and do an episode 2. There's so much more to unpack. But Nick, can't thank you enough for being here. But that's another episode of Untapped Knowledge for College. And join us next time, where we're going to dive even deeper into understanding financial aid. So we'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to Untapped Knowledge for College. Join us next time as we continue to untap the wisdom and guidance essential for success on your college journey. Follow us on Spotify or click the link in the description below to follow us on other platforms. Visit our website if you're interested in booking a session.